Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Zip Nguyen, and I'm the CEO and president of the Center for Applied Linguistics. And I want to welcome you to this space and this wonderful webinar that is co-sponsored by Californians Together, the Center for Applied Linguistics, and the National Committee for Effective Literacy. For those of you who are new to Cal, the Center for Applied Linguistics is a national organization that's founded in 1959 with the mission of promoting language learning and cultural understanding. We've had a long history of being a trusted source for research, policy analysis, and professional development and resources for educators. And I am so pleased to welcome our partners to this webinar. I am all ears. I would love to listen to all of these wonderful speakers, and I hope you do the same and you learn a lot from them. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Martha Hernandez, who is the Executive Director of Californians Together and one of the leaders in the National Committee for Effective Literacy, to welcome you. Martha?
Thank you, Zip. Good afternoon, everyone. And I'm just so delighted to also welcome you to today's important national webinar on dual language learner literacy development in early childhood education and the science of reading. The co-sponsors of this event share the vision that every child from their earliest years builds a strong foundation for reading and writing when their home languages and cultures are embraced as assets. Today's distinguished panel brings together leading experts who together will share insights from research on bilingual development and biliteracy, strategies that are culturally and linguistically responsive, and reflections on the policy landscape shaping early learning. I do want to take a moment to spotlight the National Committee for Effective Literacy. We are a national coalition of researchers, educators, administrators, and advocates working to ensure that emergent bilingual learners are at the center of literacy policy and practice. Our focus is to uplift the research, policies, and practices to ensure that students leave school as proficient readers and writers in their home language and English. I thank all of you for joining us, and I think that by coming together, we really affirm a simple and powerful truth that every child has the right to become literate in ways that honor their full linguistic and cultural identity. And now it's my pleasure to hand things over to Anayeli Hernandez, who's with the Center for Applied Linguistics. Anayeli?
Thank you very much, Marta. I'm so happy to be here. Saludos and greetings to all joining us today. I'm Anayeli Hernandez, the Director of Dual Language and Multilingual Education at Cal. I'm excited to share this space with visionary leaders in the field who are passionate about supporting our youngest multilingual learners and facilitate the conversation that we'll have today. Our panel of experts will share research-based insights that honor the identities and assets of young dual language learners while developing literacy growth in English and other languages. They will engage us in conversation that focuses on centering the unique and beautifully multifaceted trajectories of dual language learners, developing critical understandings about language and culture, and exploring effective practices and policy implications for nurturing these sophisticated pathways. Thank you again for joining us and for your commitment to our young learners. Let's begin this conversation with the first question. The question is, why did the four of you write this paper for dual language learners, literacy development in early childhood education?
Well, thank you for that question. I get the honor of answering it. My name is Martha Martinez, so I'm one of the four authors, and I am the head of research and evaluation for SEAL, Sobrato Early Academic Language. Our work really centers on advancing the educational outcomes of multilingual learners, and that's actually related to one of the first reasons why we wrote this paper. That's right, I get to advance my slides. one of the biggest reasons why we wrote this paper is that all of us are concerned for the education of multilingual children. And that umbrella term refers to both children who are in K-12 system. Those children sometimes are classified as English learners, and then younger children who are in early childhood education and preschool settings. And they are oftentimes referred to as dual language learners or DLLs. And they're a sizable portion of the children under age 9. As you can see, 60% of the children under age 9 are dual language learners. And they're also a sizable portion of the children in early childhood education settings. Over 4 million of them are in early childhood education settings, and a third of the children in Head Start programs are dual language learners. SEAL is actually based in California, where I live. We actually have an even larger multilingual learner population, and about half of the children in preschool programs in California are dual language learners. So we have a very strong interest in this population, and we have some depth of expertise in how you effectively serve this population. And so we we came together as part of the National Committee for Effective Literacy, and the 4 of us decided to write this paper because there was the science of reading that was playing out across the country, and we were concerned about narrowed interpretations of this science. There is a large body of research that supports how you teach children to read, and that oftentimes gets narrowed and focused almost exclusively on the decoding part of the equation in how you teach these children how to read. And it really divorces reading. It talks about it in isolation and from very code-based standpoint, and really divorces it from these larger developmental processes of literacy development and language development. And it also relies heavily on research on children who are learning to read in English exclusively. And so we wanted to make sure that the needs of multilingual learners and of dual language learners in particular then also receive attention as we become very much interested in advancing reading outcomes. We don't want these children then to not develop their full bilingual and biliteracy abilities, and for those not to be acknowledged. Sorry about that. And then another part of the reason why we wrote this paper is that we're also concerned that there might be a push down of elementary school practices relating to how you teach reading into the preschool context. And we wanted to make sure that we keep developmentally appropriate practices front and center for preschool settings, that they don't become overly prescriptive, overly reliant on direct instruction, overly academic, and that they make sure that they address play-based learning, which is a critical part of learning in preschool contexts. And again, that they, for dual language learners, that there is attention to the home language, to at least leverage the home language in the teaching of reading, but ideally then to further advance home language so that these children, again, have the ability to become bilingual and biliterate. And this is related then to this issue of reading and how it's playing out, and the adoption of science and of reading practices as states then adopt reading screeners. So over 80% of the states have already adopted reading screeners. There's likely to be the rest of the states joining in this effort. And oftentimes these screeners don't take, again, multilingual learners in mind. California was the only state to really explicitly adopt these screeners with multilingual learners in mind. I had the opportunity to play a role on the panel that reviewed the various assessments, and was really grateful that California took this very seriously. So we have these concerns that then also lead to, excuse me, not doing a very good job in advancing my slides, that lead to then these potential harms or a narrowed approach to the science of reading, with the preschool classrooms potentially becoming less developmentally appropriate, with this hyper focus on academics and foundational skills. And for dual language learners, then the potential for them to become mislabeled as dyslexic or having difficulties with reading, which is not necessarily the case when you use, then again, reading screeners that don't take multilingual learners into mind. They have the potential then to receive English-centric interventions as we continue to test then to see if they're advancing in their reading process. And then they have the potential to experience home language loss, and which comes with the loss of cultural and familial bonds. And then there's these long-term negative effects that really prevent dual language learners from reaching their full potential of being bilingual, biliterate, which has not just social benefits, but also some tangible academic, cognitive, and economic benefits as well. So these are the reasons why, a big part of the reasons why we wrote the paper. But we also wrote the paper to help explain the research and the science related to how it is that you should be teaching these children. And that's what my colleagues will be talking about next.
Thank you very much, Martha, for the informative section. And the next question for the group, and I believe this one is for Socorro. What are the critical understandings about culture and language that need to be considered in practice?
Thank you, Anayeli. Martha sets the stage for what it is that we should be thinking about as we lesson plan, as we make decisions about assessment, as we prepare teachers or are working in early childhood programs. We hear and we understand and are prepared to deliver instruction that is culturally responsive and sustaining, and to teach reading in context that comes out in any professional development that we attend, that we truly begin to be responsive and sustaining in ways where we understand that the child's language is fundamental, and their experiences in the world are critical to pre-literacy skills and literacy development. And we understand that for the youngest learner, that all of their meaning is contained in those first words that are available to them, the sounds, the phrases that begin to name their world. But what we find oftentimes is that the mandates that we have or the curriculum that we're asked to use really makes it impossible to build these pathways and for children and that are very much respecting of their integrity, that support in building connections with the most fundamental words and sounds that they bring with them. And so if we think about it, the work that we do in our classrooms is often limited to coding or decoding, and not so much grounded in what the child already has and what we call assets, or in their funds of knowledge. So oftentimes this can become something that we are prepared for, that we espouse, and yet in the reality of classroom practice doesn't happen. So let's think a little bit more about how language is embodied from the time that we're held in the arms of our caregivers. And let's watch the following video. And Sophia, if you'd like to start the video.
Señora Santana, ¿por qué llora el niño por una manzana que se le ha perdido? Ve a la esquina y cómprale dos, una para el niño y otra para Dios.
Mamá, las quemaditas son de papá. Tortillitas para mamá. Las quemaditas son de papá. Chiquitipum a la bim bomba. Chiquitipum a la bim bomba. Alabío, alabao, a la bim bomba. Mateo, Mateo. Ra, ra, ra.
If we were to unpack todos los sentimientos that you see in this child's response to the great grandmother, the grandmother, and the mother, we know that every language performs this similar alchemy of where speakers combine an array of sounds together and eventually they form words. But first, they start by responding in nonverbal ways. And we know that through this interaction with others in our shared environment that's full of love and joy and the sounds and words of our language, everything becomes meaningful for us. So from the very beginning of infancy, we begin to have these natural interactions with our caregivers, and this allows children to learn the sounds and words of their language, forming this unique lexicon that belongs to them. This lexicon is super well formed before they ever arrive in school, before they enter that first classroom. And it contains the words and the symbols and the sounds that they oftentimes don't encounter in classrooms. Oftentimes, even in dual language classrooms, the funds of knowledge and the assets are absent, and most of the time don't become the anchor points for those pre-literacy skills for the teaching of literacy. And so we need to remember that for emergent bilingual, these anchor points are crucial. They're crucial for oral language development. We need to understand the nonverbal components of language, the prosody, the specific patterns of stress and intonation that really help us convey meaning, and the nonverbal parts of oral language that we gain from listening and interacting with others within our own environment. What we hear is how we interpret intent and emotions from a very early on age. And so oftentimes in many classrooms, although we talk about culturally responsive and sustaining, pedagogies, although we talk about assets-based instruction and getting away from deficit, we don't spiral back to consider what it is that those sounds and those words and how the child is comprehending, comes to how it plays out in classroom practice. So we ask ourselves, what should we, oh, it doesn't, there we go. What should we be doing if we want to be culturally responsive? And so for me, when I work in classrooms across the country and here in the state of Kansas, it really is important for me to remember that if I don't see a child's home represented, across on classroom walls, I may not be culturally responsive or culturally sustaining in the way that we could be to be able to leverage language and cultural background of children. And so I always say, remember that the assets and resources for literacy live in the home first, and then they live in those early childhood classrooms. So we need to be drawing from the storytelling and from the home language, phonemic awareness, and songs and rhythms and meaning and connection that is part of their world first. This can't happen unless I harvest those literacy practices from the home. And so here you see two examples in many of the classrooms that I find myself in, that I work with, whether they be early childhood, preschool, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade. We are inviting the language of the home weekly, daily, and in living moments as the literacy lessons unfold, as reading skills are developed. And we learn so much from the families in what it is that they contribute. So if we remember that literacy development begins at home, that what's important is that we draw from and attend to the language of the home, the words and knowledge and experience the learner brings, and that we give the caregivers that space to be able to provide us what we need to know to be able to enter into reading instruction. So if you think about that, we create that context. We are the ones that draw from what it is that parents can give us. Because we know that when we do not set the conditions, gather those assets and monitor situationally and use what students bring as building blocks for the future, we set the stage for all of the things that we do not want to see happen in our classrooms. If we neglect a child's first language, including those cultural patterns of language use, we can have long-term repercussions. So oftentimes I think, what if we were truly utilizing the assets and the funds of knowledge of the child in our classroom? Would we begin to see that we are growing language, that we are truly going from the known to the unknown? Because when we neglect those assets for early literacy development, we are decreasing the potential of that child having growing in their literacy development. We are ignoring literacy practices from the home. But more important, sometimes we lose the bond with family, we lose culture, and oftentimes what we see is that what the child feels and sees and hears in the classroom very early on begins to almost silence their identity. If you go into a kindergarten, preschool classroom and you ask children if they speak another language other than English, they usually are like, yes, and they're wanting to share. If you go into a sixth grade classroom where the assets and the language of the family and the community are not utilized, those kids shut down, they diminish who they are. And so we need to begin to think of ways in which the language can be utilized in real time, intentionally, when we plan and when we deliver instruction. We need to begin to look at the perspectives of the family and the caregivers and the querencia that they bring so that we can truly be assets-based in the literacy development that we are doing. And we need to encourage children to bring those literacy practices in the classroom. And that takes intentionality, and it takes us time to think it through in a way where we weave that into existing mandates that sometimes make us feel like there isn't any time for this, because truly it is what sets up all literacy success. It brings in all potential for all children. And I didn't start by saying who I was. I'm Socorro Herrera. I am a professor at Kansas State University and director of the Center for Intercultural and Multilingual Advocacy. I've been doing this work for 40 years, and it seems like we still have a ways to go. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to any questions.
Thank you very much, Socorro. Appreciate the naming of all of those elements that sometimes are hidden, but then, are important to be able to identify. Appreciate that. And this next question we have is for Sonia. So what do early childhood educators need to understand about biliteracy development for young dual language learners?
Actually, Truth in Advertising, this is Lori Olson. I'm going to answer this one question. I am on the executive board of Californians Together. I'm one of the authors of the brief, along with Socorro, Martha, and Sonia. And I'm founder and now strategic advisor to Sobrato Early Academic Language. So great question. And my answer to that really begins with the recognition that there are three essential foundations that just have to be understood as the basis for effective literacy development. And literacy development needs to draw on all three of these for our dual language learners. No one of them alone is sufficient. The first is just recognizing that these are little ones. These are 3, 4, 5-year-olds at a point in their human development where their brains are just wired for language development. They're beginning to develop language and use it to name their world and find their way through this world. And they do it with all of their senses in a very integrated way as they interact
interact with the world. Well, understanding how they do that, how young children learn, is just crucial to any high quality early childhood pedagogy overall. And it's certainly crucial for literacy development as well. So we're talking strength-based, play-based, integrated pedagogy that's designed to, in the words of National Association for the Education of Young Children, support the development of each child in their own time, in their own way. So developmentally appropriate practice is just a pillar of early literacy practice that's effective. Second, there's just the whole evidence base about how literacy develops and the components of literacy. And then on top of all that, key to all of this for our dual language learners is that context that Socorro was talking about, of responding to the cultures and the languages and the family experiences that are the tools and the context for their learning. So effective practices are going to be built on dual language development, on how bilingualism and biliteracy develop, on second language acquisition, and on how those languages interact and build on and from each other. Bottom line, for our dual language learners, this means just recognizing that the development of literacy for them is different than it is for a child who's monolingual, because the new language and literacy system is developing in the presence of and in interaction with their existing and still developing home language. All of them are processing learning and thought in and through and across those different language systems. We know that humans have the capacity to develop bilingually and to support and build different language systems and integrated language systems, and the metalinguistic muscle across of those that is one of the great strengths of bilingualism. So recognizing that relationship has to be a basic pillar as we enter into literacy development. And the degree to which we, as their early childhood educators, understand and embrace and leverage their skills and strengths in their home language and their emergence as bilinguals in the process of their literacy development is going to make all the difference in the world. So let's dig a little deeper and look at language, because literacy begins with language. Literacy is language in print form, and the development of strong, rich oral language has to be the foundation of our approach to literacy. Children need to discover, yes, that those marks on a page represent sounds that together form words, but if those sounds themselves are unfamiliar to them, if those words have no meaning for them because they're in a language the child doesn't understand, then learning to read and write is significantly hampered. So we begin with language, oral language, rich oral language, language to comprehend and use words to name and label their world, to express their needs, to interact and communicate, which involves vocabulary. It involves grammar, how those words go together, learning the purposes and practices of language, as well as honing in and distinguishing the phonology of each language, being able to form those sounds. The development of all of this has to be supported by early childhood educators who engage children in using language, in conversation and in relationships, modeling the language, teaching vocabulary, chanting and singing with children, reading aloud often, daily, so they're hearing the rhythm of the language, learning its meaning, and simultaneously, by the way, discovering the wonder of books. And it happens by adults who are pointing out the connections between their languages and helping children become those discoverers of the relationships. And literacy, then, socialization into the world of print, gets built on that foundation of language. Beginning literacy involves becoming actively engaged in and with print. That's how they're discovering the purpose, the motivation, the reasons for, the wonder of print, the connection to themselves, and why one even would read or write. And in that process, they develop an awareness of how text works, its uses, its different forms. Children read to, provided access for looking at books, is how they learn basic concepts of print and begin to develop a sense of how to make a meaning out of that text. If those experiences are positive, if the content of the text connects to them, they also begin to develop that important literacy identity. Literacy is for me. I belong in this world of print. And as they see their own words turn into print through dictation, their own writing, they discover that print is also a tool for putting themselves into the world. And this is crucial to early literacy. It happens when adults in their world engage them in interactive read-alouds all the time, talking about books, providing lots of access to books of all kinds, dictating their words, seeing them turn into print in all of their languages. And all of this depends on a language-rich environment where there's lots of talk, a purpose for talk, ways to engage in talk, and print-rich environments where they have so much access to books and writing materials and the opportunity to engage in literacy activities. But it's the relationship between these and everything that they're learning about the world that the real power lies for our dual language learners. Because literacy develops in the context of what they're learning about. It's as they're discovering the world and talking about the world, literacy has purpose and meaning. They want to read those books, right? And then the books expose them even further to language. There's a reciprocity here that is essential. These three domains, language, literacy, and content, support, depend upon, and bolster each other. That's how young children learn, so it's developmentally appropriate, and it's essential for our dual language learners who require that kind of connection and context, particularly those many who are being exposed to literacy in English, which is not their strongest language. And so our brief describes these 5 aspects of early literacy skill development for dual language learners. The first being the importance of what I just said, that language-rich, print-rich environment that offers tangible immersion and content as the context for developing literacy. Second, the emphasis on modeling and developing rich expressive oral language and wide vocabulary development in both languages. Third, phonological awareness in and through language, building that ear to hear the language and the skills of actually producing the language. Fourth, active positive engagement with text in the home language and in English, access to lots of books and writing opportunities. And fifth, utilizing all of that to build cross-language connections and metalinguistic awareness. Now, you might well ask, people do all the time, well, where in this is instruction in those code-based skills of reading that are so important? What about systematic phonics instruction and explicit instruction in letter and word recognition skills? This is where that push-down danger that Martha spoke about earlier lurks. Young children develop language and readiness to attend to print at different paces. Remember, developmentally appropriate practice supports their development in their own way at their own pace. Some of our preschoolers are ready for explicit instruction, not instead of, but in addition to everything I've already described. But many are not. Developmentally appropriate practice for young dual language learners engages them just in those print-rich environments and activities integrated with oral language, the context of learning about the world. And we are trusting, not just trusting, we know that for young children, that strong foundation is the precursor foundation for literacy development. Readiness for more explicit skill development will come if the foundation is built. And for those who are ready, those code-based skills can be then developed in context with writing and reading as integrated sister skills. And for all of our dual language learners, always done with pedagogy, materials, and support for their dual language reality that engages and supports dual language development, putting them on the pathway to literacy, not just in English, but for the multiple language and cultural worlds that they live in. So that's my answer to your question.
Thank you very much, Lori, and I apologize for jumping ahead there a bit. So the next question we have is, how do we create the strong biliteracy foundations for young bilingual children for long-term success? And we have Sonia answering this question for real
Thank
this
you
time.
so much, Anayeli. Thank you. My name is Sonia Soltero. I am a professor of bilingual education at DePaul University here in Chicago. So hello from Chicago. I'm also a former dual language public school teacher. One of the authors of this brief as well. And I'd like to start off by emphasizing the importance of creating sustainable, high quality programs for multilingual learners. Because the programs, in the way that they're structured and in the way that they include the home language and this idea of rich oral language development and early literacy practices that have the same richness as the ESL, ELD, authentic literature, etc., is sort of anchors all of this for multilingual learners. So it's very critical that the instruction, the materials, the curriculum, assessment, the family engagement, the professional development leadership, and so much more have to be anchored in well-designed, well-implemented bilingual and dual language education programs when possible. I know that it's not always possible to provide home language instruction for long periods of time. Sometimes here in Chicago, for example, we have many schools that have multiple languages in a school, so it's sometimes not feasible to do that. When possible, we should be doing that. So even the ESL, ELD programs need to be also well designed and well implemented. So it's very critical to understand that instruction and teachers who are teachers of multilingual learners, including general education teachers, have to be functioning not in isolation, but in a well-designed comprehensive program. To that, I wanted to just mention that just Martha laid the groundwork for the brief that we wrote and also provided the why today. Socorro provided some of the what, and so Lori and I are providing the how. In the brief, we talk about the importance of the critical conditions for literacy development for all students, but particularly for multilingual learners. So the importance of having high quality, relevant, and culturally inclusive and responsive texts and materials, literacy development that is integrated with content learning, and always affirming an inclusive climate of support for home language, culture, and bilingualism. Now, a caveat about this word support. We need to do more than support. We need to, our responsibility as educators is to teach. So it's not just support, it's not just translating or providing extra help, but it's actually we're responsible for engaging these students in our teaching and their learning. So just beyond support. So how does this look? This is an example here in Chicago, in Chinatown, in preschool that had 3 and 4-year-olds. And you can see here the notion of affirming an inclusive climate and support for home language, culture, and bilingualism, where the students are writing with the teacher. Some of them are doing some of the writing, but this is the teacher writing for them and showing them. And so here's an example of what the teacher displayed in the classroom, where there's lots of this particular year and this school has a lot of Cantonese speakers. And so the students who are developing English as their new language. And so, but here you see display of the 2 languages with a majority, because the majority of the students are Cantonese speakers, they see their language and they see themselves in this language early on. In addition, I wanted to talk about high quality, relevant, and culturally inclusive and responsive texts and materials, and the notion of moving away to the extent possible. I know there are a lot of directives coming from above, from districts and states, and sometimes the leadership of schools around not moving away perhaps, but including more these types of highly authentic, rich language and imagery that you see here, for example. So just relying on decodable and controlled text is not enough. I know that those need to be used, but there's an over-reliance and an overuse of those type of books. So here are some that speak to and reflect the diversity of diversity. So, for example, Niña Bonita is a beautiful. It's a very old book, but it's a beautiful book about this young girl that lives in a Caribbean country and just loves her dark color and getting darker and darker in the sun, and she's Niña Bonita. So, for example, the Latino community is very diverse in terms of ethnicity and race. Other cultures also are very diverse. So we have to make sure that we are moving away also from stereotypical notions of what is diversity. Here also is an exemplar of books, children's books and picture books that have that intercultural and cross-cultural depictions. So the intersection and hybridity of cultures for multilingual learners. So, for example, the Tooth Fairy meets El Ratón Pérez. You may know if you are from Latin America that the tooth fairy doesn't come in Latin America. A mouse comes and takes your tooth away when you lose your tooth when you're a child, versus a tooth fairy, and how all those things come into play, and the hybridity. The same with the Throw Your Tooth on the Roof, which is a book about the multiple traditions about losing your teeth when you're young and what happens to that. So that passage. Here are a couple of other exemplars of books, and in this case are books that intersect the languages. So there's most of these books are English-based and are peppered with Spanish, in this case, Spanish words or phrases. So again, the intersection of how the two languages intersect, in particular in the context of the United States. We are here talking about language and literacy includes is beyond reading and writing, listening and speaking, and thinking about the language structures that encompass all languages. So the morphology and the phonology, how we sound words and how we sound, the letter sound correspondence and phonemic awareness and all those type of things related to phonology. Syntax, the grammar, the semantics and the meaning and the pragmatics, how we use language in different contexts. So for these are what we refer to as, oops, we're having a little trouble here, as the surface language structures, the morphology, phonology, and syntax, and the deep language structures or features that are the semantic and pragmatics, particularly difficult for second language learners. At the core of everything is meaning, because we are trying to extract meaning from text and from understanding or from listening to language. And we're encoding text in our writing and our speaking. For the bilingual context, or for the bilingual and multilingual learners, the features that are very critical to consider are these biliteracy features. So the meta-bilingual awareness, the cross-linguistic connection between the two languages or more than two languages sometimes, and the intersection as well as culture. And I put cultures here in plural because there is not one culture, including in the United States, there is not one culture of the United States. So we have to keep those in mind as well. So the bilingual brain. Lori spoke about it, and my other colleagues, both Socorro and Martha as well, thinking about the bilingual brain that is constantly engaging in the two languages. So it's critical to embed both in planned and spontaneous cross-linguistic connections in the daily teaching and learning at all grade levels and in all content areas. So we need to shift mindsets that follow a more holistic bilingual and biliteracy approach that views language and literacy development in the two languages as integrated systems rather than separate ones that Lori talked about. So here are some examples very quickly. This is the cat. I don't know if you are familiar with What Will Fat Cat Sit On? This was a kindergarten class, a dual language kindergarten class. And the child was writing their own writing. And I don't know if you can discern what this says. So I'll read it to you. The cat, fat, eat la uva. So you see over here, what's kind of like in outer space there, those are uvas, which are grapes. And so the child is writing, oops, I don't know what happened. Okay, we're back. Technology, isn't it wonderful? So la uva, the child was writing in English, the dual language. The child is a Spanish speaker and they couldn't remember how to say grapes, so included la uva, perfectly fine. Here's another example. Los sapos son gordos y están feos y son de piel dura y rough. Los sapos no. So rough, this child is writing in Spanish, doesn't remember how to say rough in Spanish, and phonetically writes very well, writes the word rough. Can hear all the sounds in the word rough, but rough is a very difficult word to spell out. It's non-phonetic. So very quickly, so thinking about this circle of meaning, reading, listening, speaking, and writing, and the language features for any language up at the top, and then the meta-bilingual awareness, cross-linguistic connections, and culture. And so what do we need to do here? We need to shift away, reevaluate our practices, and, sorry, having some difficulty with the slides. Okay, here we go. Shifting away from siloed discrete skill instruction, shifting away from rote learning and memorization, rote digital books and programs. We have to be very careful with not just digital books, but also digital programs that tend to be very rote oriented. Reading and writing packages that are that don't reflect the student's background. Only using controlled decodable text. They should be used, but they should be used in moderation. Leveled books that level children. Limited access to authentic books in their classroom and at home. And this, when I was a teacher, a classroom teacher, we had a lot of time for free reading, but that's sort of something from the past that we need to resuscitate. Free reading is very critical. And all of this to do what? To create a lifelong love of reading and writing and literacy and language. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Anayeli. We're going to be talking about policy with Lori. Anayeli, we can't hear you. You're on mute.
I am. There I am. There I am. Thank you very much, Sonia. Yes, another question for you all. Given what has been described in the brief and the session, what role does policy play in bringing about effective early biliteracy for dual language learners? And I'll pass this on to Lori.
All right. Well, certainly individual teachers and program directors can enact aspects of what we've just described and talked about. And we've all worked in many preschool and early childhood settings to help people do that. But what we are always up against is people saying things like, well, we don't have the materials, or the curriculum that was adopted doesn't really allow that, or we're getting different kinds of guidance, or we don't have the staff. We're being told to do otherwise. And in fact, in some of the questions that I've seen show up from this group, I hear some of that also. They're recognizing how do we convince people? How do we advocate for this? And so let me just start by saying that policy is what sets the conditions and the formal guidance and sometimes restrictions, and it has to be aligned with this kind of understanding about what our dual language learners really need and what the evidence really shows. When it's misguided, when it's ill-informed, when it doesn't recognize all of this, it gets in the way and it does harm. So the first thing I want to say about policy is what we have to be sure is not happening, the kind of policies that we have to deal with and contest. One of the things is policy proposals that are just based on monolingual English speakers, don't address second language development at all, or its connection to English literacy development. It's as if all children were monolingual English-speaking children. It's not sufficient. We have to be wary of those policy proposals that don't address bilingual, biliteracy development for dual language learners. They need literacy for all of their language and cultural worlds, and they develop literacy only in that context. So we need policy that's going to really align with that. And we need to be wary of policy initiatives that are not, as you've heard over and over again from us, developmentally inappropriate. That kind of push down, unnecessarily academic, didactic approach to discrete, isolated, siloed reading skills in the preschool years. So then what's the policy we need to be pushing for, that we need to be trying to create? Well, one of the things is we have to deal with workforce. We have to deal with building both the early childhood education teacher pipeline that of people that can work bilingually with our dual language learners, that have the endorsements and the authorizations. We need good coursework in the credential and the certification programs and licensure programs that really focus on what assessment really means for dual language learners and how to assess them in a new language that is not what they've been developing in utero, as Sakura was pointing out. We need to fund the professional learning for the workforce so that they can develop these skills and these understandings. And without that workforce, it's not going to happen. So that's why our first big bullets are really about the workforce. Then we need guidance on early literacy development that really supports this kind of pedagogy. And the last bullet and the policy recommendations on our brief are, there's so much effort right now being put into literacy development, such an important time for focus on this issue in our nation. We need to be sure that those people who know the research, who are experts on biliteracy, who understand dual language development, are in those conversations. So that's a matter of who's at the table. I want to just end this section by saying, all of this means we have to become advocates. And I think, again, your comments are reflecting that, which means that for ourselves, we need to know the research. Our hope in doing this brief was that we would provide you with a tool that lays out for you the why, the research, what's known about all of this. And every one of us needs to be able to carry that forward and to really be the voice for what our young dual language learners need. So that's, in a short version, what I would say about policy. Where our hope was to not only bring to you our brief, but some other resources, a sense of where you can go for help on all of this. From the National Committee for Effective Literacy, we have both the brief, the one on the far left, which is what we've been talking about today, and it's both in an executive summary form and in the full brief. We've also produced a set of other papers that may be in briefs that would be useful to you. One is Voices from the Field of teachers across the spectrum, across the states, talking about what implementation of some of the science of reading policies have been and its impact on those who are working with dual language learners. So it's in the voices of teachers, it's what they're experiencing up against these policies and these directives in trying to make it work for dual language learners. The third one is a comprehensive effective literacy model, which is not just early education, but it starts with early education and continues up into the elementary years as well, laying out what it really looks like across that time. National Committee on Effective Literacy has a website, and here's the QR code that'll take you to this website where you can get those papers and others. We have a whole set of resources for you. We have podcasts, we have research to back it up, et cetera. And so we encourage you to turn to us for that kind of sisterhood in this work. And finally, I wanted to let you know about a summit that we will be holding on January 21st. It's an online summit, but it's a full-blown speakers, breakout sessions that'll really be taking on this issue of what is effective literacy for the multilingual students of our nation. So that's the end of what I have to offer. I think, Aniele, is this the time to take questions? Or
It is, yes. And we have a couple of questions here that I would like to start. There was a direct question to Lori's session about just right books or other kinds of leveled texts. It seems like we should prioritize fostering a love for reading over limiting students to a narrow band of books that are just right. Lori, would you like to share a little bit about this question?
I will, and then I'd hope that Sonia might add a few comments on this too. The first thing is today's webinar is really about speaking to those preschool years, speaking to the early childhood education years. And I feel that's a precious space, particularly because so much of the literacy conversation just drifts into the other things. And the issue of leveled books is really for an issue to take on for older kids. But let me just say that for young children, it is that exposure to literature, its purposes of books, the basic concepts of print and how print works, that sense of beginning letter recognition, et cetera. Those are the important things. The issue of leveled books and just right books is really a matter of purpose and how and what else is going on. It's not a way to build a sense of meaning. It's not a way to build a sense of purpose of literature or why you would engage with books or even familiarity with the the medium of much written language. But for somebody who is just working on, I have a kid who just needs to do some practice, they're working on some fluency or they're working on some, it can have a place. So I'm not a person that is, strongly, absolutely yes, absolutely no. I feel like teachers need to understand the purposes of each thing that they're doing around literacy and be able to use the different strategies appropriately. And for dual language learners, if you're using those just right leveled books with kids that are ready for it developmentally, and you're using it in the context of a very robust, comprehensive literacy approach, I would just say, be sure that those books are working with the language that they know, where they have
And
to
I will very quickly add that there are, I think we're preaching to the choir here. We have many picture books that are appropriate for older students because of the content and the language. So just shying away from picture books, I've seen high school teachers use wonderful picture books that are appropriate for that grade level. So there was a question about what about authentic literature that are not chapter books for multilingual learners in the early stages of English proficiency. They're wonderful wordless books with a lot of heavy content, graphic novels, and other kind of pictured books that have just beautiful art and content that is appropriate for that age level.
Thank you very much, Lori and Sonia, for your response to the questions. There's another question earlier on, and Socorro, would you be willing to respond to a question about how webinars like these attract educators who already acknowledge these approaches and what's needed, but the frustration that lies within of how it can still be brushed off, right? With this need to learn how to intentionally support young multilingual learners. The Karen Nemeth says, I'm still hearing from experts, oh, they'll be fine. We show visuals and offer play-based learning, so they'll catch up sooner or later. Would you like to share some thoughts on that, Socorro?
Yes, Anayeli, when you only have 9 minutes, you're going really fast. The intentionality that we have in actually gathering from the home if we intentionally begin to think about how it is that we build literacy skills, what the foundation is, and I talked a little bit about in the slides, although they were very quickly, but the brief addresses it. What I find is we have lots of conversations and we can label all the things that need to happen in reading. And there are great books out there as resources. But oftentimes, if you're working with a Guatemalan or Cuban or child from India, we can all the languages. We have to enter into the home so that we can see how it is that what poetry they're using, what idioms, not idioms, but what sayings they're using, and draw from that to bring it into the classroom. That needs to be on the wall. One of the pictures that I was showing about going into fall, the teacher used those little poems about la época más bonita que nos gusta nuestra familia, and families sent poems about fall, and the grandmother sent a song that she likes to sing about the fall, and those become part of the practices that we take in classroom. But until we gather from the home intentionally, and that comes up on the walls, then we are still having a separation of literacy from the home, literacy practices from the home, and literacy in the school. And we can find all the books that have been published and buy all the books, but there's going to be a few children in there that come from a region in Guatemala that will never be able to connect to that book. Maybe the color of the skin of the children in the book, but not any of the content of the book. So we have to balance both. We have to, and as somebody asked a question about 6th to 8th graders, that holds true for them. They have had experiences from in their homes, within their communities, that when that comes into the classroom, you see them come to life because they can definitely connect the known to the unknown, and it sets up for learning the skills that we need to have in reading. But that takes an intentionality, and it takes learning the biography of the learner, the history of the learner, the literacy practices of the home. And we've yet to arrive there in the work that we do in schools. I mean, I'll say it. Even I still am learning after 40 years.
Thank you very much, Socorro. So I'm going through and I appreciate everyone dropping in their questions. I wish we had a little bit more time to respond to them. And Martha, I hate to put you on the spot. There was another question here as I'm going in order. What can we do to bring these critical points to people who don't realize they need these points?
Yeah, this is like the age-old question, right? Honestly, you need to meet people at that ZPD, right? The zone of proximal development. That's for everyone, from children to us. It's like, where do you bring someone into conversation about this where they're ready to learn? Because part of this is about changing mindsets, right? The other part is skill development, and they go hand in hand. And so I really would lean on, there is also research around this. And so our work is also grounded in the science of learning, right? This is about the science of learning and what are we open to? And so I would encourage you to reach out to your colleagues and have had conversations about them and have them also realize that what's so wonderful about preschool that we forget about is joy in learning, right? And that is related to motivation to learn. And we need to keep sight of that. And if they have the chance to see then a child's face light up when they see themselves reflected in the classroom, when they have the ability then that they get what's going on, then anyone can connect to that joy too. So I hope that we can just meet people where they are and encourage all of us to continue on our learning journey.
Thank you very much, Marta. And just wrapping up the conversation, aware of the time, I just want to thank all of you as panelists for your commitment and your collective efforts, and to all joining us for championing what it means to support multilingual learners. And with that, I will pass it back to Althea to do the final closing words. Thank you, Althea.
Thank you. This was very engaging. We're so glad you joined us today. A big thank you to our panelists for bringing your expertise and for giving us your time. There was a lot of knowledge shared here today. For the audience, I'd like to thank you for coming. To our facilitator, thank you so much. And to Dr. Nguyen and Martha Hernandez, thank you as well for doing the introduction. Please watch your emails for a recording of this webinar. And we will also share a link to the resources. And we look forward to seeing you at the next one. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.